This is Analytics with Asa, hosted on the FF Faceoff YouTube channel. I'm here joined by my friend Sam Brookhouse. Sam, how you doing, my man?
I'm doing awesome, Asa. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be back on the show, and it's the real season. It's the draft season. Screw all those games, man. Like, we want to get excited. This is the one time of the year where anybody could be excited. Maybe unless you're a very, very nervous Titans, Browns, or Giants fan, but for the most part, optimism it rules the day here.
No, I love it because, yeah, like you mentioned, it's the one time where teams can actually be optimistic and make the case for how their team can get this player to go to the Super Bowl. So I love it. But first, I wanted to talk to you today. In the spirit of rookie season, there's a lot of music, there's a lot of bands that put out debuts in the hopes that it can reach the stars. And so I wanted to ask you first, what, in your opinion, is the best debut album of all time? And you can go with as many as you want here, but I want to get your opinion first.
Okay, so I'm going to start in the hip hop community, not just because I live in New York, but it's like 1992, 93, and all the radio stations start picking up the Golden Child, and all the best producers start working with this person. And it all is based off of this one song called Live at the Barbecue, which is like off of some weird tape that was going around record stores in New York. And that is Nas and that is Illmatic. I think that is the best, most complete debut album ever. You're basically talking about an 18-year-old who releases perhaps the best hip hop tape of all time, just off rip, just immediately, with the best producers. You're talking about DJ Premier. You're talking about Large Professor. I mean, you like list the best New York producers of all time. They're on the tape. You have lyrics that are absolutely iconic. I woke up early on my born day. I'm 20. It's a blessing. The adolescence on like all. There's like so many good ones. Halftime, and then there's no skips. And there's one feature on the entire one, and the feature is like iconic. And so, for my first entry into this, I'm going to say that, if Cam Ward or Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter have an Illmatic opening to their career, they're certainly going to be good players.
No, I love that. I went with one of the picks of the 90s, and it is by one of the big four grunge bands. And, you could bring out Bleach by Nirvana, you could bring out Facelift, Alice in Chains, but I think probably the best one, and it may mark the high point of that band's career, is 10 by Pearl Jam. And like you mentioned before with Illmatic, like there's so many songs that are just absolute bangers. There's no skips there. They have Jeremy, there's Black, there's Even Flow. And, some of these songs have been memed a little bit, but I want to get your thoughts on 10 real quick.
It's an excellent call out, especially given the longevity of Pearl Jam in that community.
Mm-hmm.
That has not, unfortunately for Nirvana, and I guess you could kind of say the spirit of Nirvana continues on with the Foo Fighters and Dave Grohl. But as you said, kind of they were still pretty underground after their first album and really hit with their second album, whereas Pearl Jam immediately was not only a good band or a well-respected band, but had put out a classic album that appealed to people past those that just like grunge and did have a little bit more of that classic rock feel to it, but also had Eddie Vedder's, Herm Jarl, as Ezra Koenig from Vampire Weekend likes to say, vocals, and had all these innovative things. So that's an excellent pick. Another one that I wanted to throw in the ring, I'm sticking in New York, but this is my favorite album of all time, is This It by The Strokes. Very similar album where we get kind of out of the grunge phase. We get kind of into nu metal in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then all of a sudden in Europe, a band from New York starts popping out with a couple of singles. New York City Cops is one. And then all of a sudden a just fully formed album comes out that kind of sets the scene for the early 2000s, pre 9/11, and then ending up continuing post 9/11 New York scene of they're going to sound like the Velvet Underground there, and then adding on LCD Sound System as well as like kind of the major tentpole band of that era. it sounds very late 70s, early 80s, kind of the downswing of New York, but the upswing of like creativity in New York. If you're talking about Basquiat, Andy Warhol, and all these people in the art scenes, and that revival came back in the early 2000s. So that's another one I want to mention. That's, I think, very similar to 10 by Pearl Jam in the fact that it was just this fully formed artistry, fully formed band coming out and immediately making an impact and immediately making an album that appealed both to the references that it was making on the album and thus the, the older community, but also having a major impact on those who were young and enjoying the new wave of music.
Yeah, I love that answer because almost similar to Pearl Jam, I know they do play very different styles of music. Julian's vocals are just so iconic, and not just the vocals,
Right.
but also like the mixing on the vocals that so many bands post Is This It wanted to sound like him. And an example that comes to mind is The Killers with
Right.
what was it, Hot Fuzz? Yeah, where they wrote this whole album and then they heard that and they're like, we have to change everything. And it just speaks to like the influence that that album had. And similarly with Pearl Jam, I guess you could argue it's maybe not the best thing with the rise of kind of like the creeds of the world and the Godsmacks, and where it almost sounded like a parody of Eddie Vedder's vocals, but you can't deny the influence on there.
What I'll say about that Pearl Jam album in particular is there were great kind of live shows that Nirvana did, but when you go back and listen to those shows, you're more listening to it typically for the stunt because, Kurt would come out and do whatever he wanted to do. Whereas when you start listening to the post early Pearl Jam live shows, they're just like some of the best and most high quality live tapings of a rock show. And I think that Pearl Jam probably led that and is still leading that with their live shows today. In particular, there's one by Bush that ironically, when I was traveling to see our executives, Sumer Sports' executives, who are all based in Seattle, I started listening to this live album by Bush, and it's just so clear, despite the fact that it's in maybe a 200-person venue early on in their career. And the fact that I think after particularly Alice in Chains and particularly Pearl Jam, the idea that people wanted to have these live tapings pretty early on in their career is really great for me who loves live tapings.
Yeah. I think you set that up perfectly because Nirvana, in my opinion, definitely has its origins, at least culturally, in the punk scene. And so, like you mentioned, while the recording obviously matters, what matters a lot more to a band like Nirvana is the energy that the crowd has and the fact that people are moshing. And I know they had some guy on stage that would run around and just do crazy dance moves. And for my final pick, I wanted to kind of capture that spirit as well. And I think another band that's notorious for having its origins in the punk/hardcore scene that has an amazing debut album is Rage Against the Machine's self-titled album. Not only is it just their iconic image that has a political statement, their lyrics are obviously political as well, but they're great at that kind of like sloganeering where even the small phrases that Zach would say just stick in the minds of people. And yeah, I think that album also paired with Tom Morello's creativity on guitar, because he's not going to be playing the most insane solos in the world, but he's doing like these weird techniques to almost sound like a laser, and all of that combined with the funk and the hardcore. Yeah, Rage Against the Machine, one of the best albums of all time.
That's a fantastic one. And talking about the live shows as well, I think they are a real dichotomy or a real outlier in that movement towards the blending of rap and hard rock in particular, or metal in particular, that kind of stands out. And I think it stands out most starkly when we're talking about Woodstock 99, right? Because they played one of the most killer sets that I've ever seen at Woodstock 99. But their message was kind of the antithesis of the hedonism that we now think of in terms of what Woodstock 99 was. And so when we do think about Woodstock 99, you start thinking about Fred Durst and Break Stuff and stuff like that, which I got to say, I think I'm getting ready. The time is right The trends have been moving a little bit more towards the early 2000s anyway. I think I'm about to start just breaking out Break Stuff as a karaoke song, which is a wild pick, but I think I'm going to do it at some point. Typically my karaoke song is Benny and the Jets. So a real movement away from the traditional there. All that to say, the idea that they have a true message, whilst the creativity and innovation on guitar, as you said, with Tom Morello, and additionally adding in the elements of, for not to be too on the nose here, but like literally rage is all innovative and things that weren't really being done. You think about their predecessors, like musically, I think they're probably closest to someone like the Red Hot Chili Peppers, but the Red Hot Chili Peppers were, I don't want to say a lot funkier, but the vibes, the influences were a lot closer to Parliament in terms of their kind of vocals, and the way they were going to innovate, or the way they were going to make a statement, was going to be in kind of the outlandishness of it all, where it was very direct, very to the point, kind of in that grunge spirit, as you kind of outlined from Rage Against the Machine, where they were going to put it right in front of your face and it was going to sound great, which is, it's crazy that that's innovative, but it really was at the time.
No, 100%. And another thing as well, you mentioned the whole blending of the rap and the metal, and often that's a little bit cringe, or it almost sounds like it's a caricature of both of those genres. But I do think that Zach is just so good at blending those two together that it still sounds authentic, and he does have those origins in hardcore. For the hardcore fans, he does have a band prior to this called Inside Out, and that's a very, very good band. But yeah, they did not last super long as a band. I know they've toured a little bit recently with Zach having the injury, but the impact that they made on not just the hardcore scene, but the new metal scene and the rap scene, the rock scene, all of that is just element to how important they were as a band, both culturally and politically.
I'm gonna add in, just because we've gone with 4 all male bands. I for my last pick, I was thinking about going straight Madonna, because Madonna is one of my favorite artists. But we've covered some really big bands, so I do want to go still a big band, but a little smaller and a little kind of like off the innovative path. One of my favorite debut albums is Haim's debut album. And, girl band, 3 sisters, very LA based, produced by Ariel Rekshad, who is, kind of a super producer, has produced Vampire Weekend, Rostam, like you name it. He's probably top 3 producer right now in pop, alongside guys like, Dan Nigro and some of the other guys, Jack Antonoff. And the completeness of it, but the idea that they were taking influences from things you wouldn't expect, like 20-year-old girls to be taking influence from, was extremely interesting to me. And then also the fact that they made an album which got pretty popular for being played in Target all the time, but it sounded like crazy good. You add in like elements from Michael Jackson, from Fleetwood Mac, the harmonies, and then the ability for them to build off of that in their following albums leading up to an album that they're about to release. I think they released a single like yesterday, and it is something that has always stuck with me. And I think their ability to kind of have a spectacle, but also have a tight pop sound that is rooted in like R&B. It's rooted in Madonna. There's like techno elements to it, but it's so clean and it's so consistent that you can just rip through like the first 4 or 5 songs and be like, whoa, this is something. Like, this is something big. It is something that it's tough to get kind of in the streaming era. I think that came out maybe 2013, 2014. And so you're really just getting into the Spotify, Apple Music era there. But they came out with like a pretty classically built album. And then we're talking about live shows. Like right before COVID, their whole shtick was that they were just going to play a ton of shows in like delis around the country. And so their ability to like manage the stunt of it all and the stunt of rock and roll with really, really clean pop while also having like a killer live show is something that I really respect, and the reason why they're still relevant now.
I'll close things out with a band that I personally like a lot, and they kind of stick in that hardcore range, but they are much smaller than the other bands we talked about. And it's a band called Vane. It's short. It's Vane.fm is their full name, but most people just call them Vane. But they are known for blending like the kind of some of the elements of nu metal with the more like industrial hardcore stuff that's been popular recently. And their debut album is called Errorzone. And it's one of those albums where just based on the album cover, you can kind of get a good vibe check of what it's going to sound like. And one thing I love that songs do is whenever they blend into the next song, and that album does that a lot. And for those who aren't aware of Vane, they may be a little bit familiar with their side project that is currently opening for the Deftones tour, and it is Fleshwater. And I've seen them live a few times, but I'm a big hardcore guy, and the shows are always really fun. But just listening to the album to me is like one of my favorite things to do, and the drumming on that is just insane.
Yeah, I gotta look into them. I love anybody who tags the FM onto the back. I got my podcast Draft FM, which comes out on Mondays for all the listeners of this podcast. Would love if you could give me a listen, specifically as we get closer to the draft. But like just kind of a sidebar, the reason why I wanted to tag FM to the back of that, and I don't know Vane, I've never listened to them, so correct me if I'm wrong, but there's like a long history of pirate radio, particularly in New York and London. And I got really into the pirate radio scenes, which include stuff like dance hall. They'd play a lot of Afro beats. They'd play a lot of grime, rap. And speaking of debuts, like the one that stuck out to me as you were kind of talking about the way that they approach it, which is, a sidebar to the hardcore community, it's more in the grime and UK rap community, is Stormzy's Shut Up, which is just a song. Like it's just a single song. But it's crazy how based on the strength of one song, you can parlay that into something big, or the strength of one live album, like you said, or one live show, you can parlay into a bigger thing. And frankly, has a lot of parallels to the draft, because we have guys in this draft who, have parlayed one good thing about them into perhaps a top 15 pick.
Yeah, I think you transitioned us perfectly into our coverage of the draft. So great job there. Real skills as the daily podcast host in the past. But let's talk a little bit about the NFC South. So that is the division we're going to be covering today. And before we go team by team, I wanted to get your kind of macro level perspective on the way this division handled free agency as a whole. Do you have an overwhelming like word you can use, or is there a favorite move that each of these teams may have made that we want to cover a little bit?
So I think if we're going to take a step back and look at what's happened in the NFC South, you got to look at a division which at one point thought they were going to have quarterbacks for 20 years. A couple years ago, you had the Saints with Drew Brees, you had the Falcons with Matt Ryan, you had the Panthers with Cam Newton, and then later on you had the Bucs with Jameis Winston. And I think there was a period of time, particularly when Jameis was kind of in the middle of his rookie contract, where it was like, okay, we're just going to have four of the best quarterbacks in the league, basically until the wheels fall off of any of these players, which obviously it did with Matt Ryan and Drew Brees over time, and happened substantially earlier than I would have liked. I love Cam Newton with the Panthers, but that informs the face of this division going into the 2020s and going into this year as well, where you're looking at a Saints team which is still dealing with basically the ramifications of having a team with 10 plus guys in Pro Bowl contention. And how do you manage that long term? How do you keep those guys on the team? And they tried to stick to them. Now that's starting to fall apart. Marshawn Lattimore traded last year. The tackles are now gone. Taron Armstead's now retired. Drew Brees is now retired. Cam Jordan and Demario Davis are still on the team. Tyrann Mathieu still on the team. All of those guys, and including other guys like Michael Thomas, the wheels came out despite them being in contention for All Pro for many years. You look at the Bucs. Jameis didn't work out, so they sign up for Tom Brady. Tom Brady is obviously old. the bones of that Tom Brady team is all still there. Vita Vea, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Wirfs. Now they've added Gedeke. And I think they've lucked into Baker, and that's why they've been kind of the consensus favorite year over year, because Baker has been good for 2 years and they still have the bones of a good team. But they're still dealing with the ramifications per se of the Jameis Winston pick not working out and trying to reshuffle the deck quickly by adding Tom Brady. The Panthers are dealing with Cam Newton just completely becoming injured and then going down. And that's the face of their team. And then same thing with the Falcons, even though they've been able to retool pretty well. So I think we can't address anything without understanding that it seems like everyone other than the Bucs is still trying to figure out their quarterback situation, but they all think they have it fixed except for maybe the Saints, which obviously we'll get to as we start talking about the draft. But if you start contextualizing all these free agency moves in the face of that, in the face of we were really good in the mid to late 2010s, and now we're just trying to figure it out, it makes a lot of these moves make a lot more sense.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect explanation of the division as a whole. And so let's go a little bit on what your favorite move may be that one of these teams made, if you were to have one.
Yeah, so I think if there's a favorite move to be had, it was the Bucs kind of doubling down at a quality cost and just re-signing Chris Godwin, but at something that was reasonable. You know, I think Chris Godwin probably could have had an argument, particularly if he would have hit the free market, to try to get something in the Devontae Smith, Nico Collins, and now T. Higgins market, where he's a 1B wide receiver too. You know, he's a guy who has been so immensely productive when he's been on the field that it, quite frankly, he can sustain an offense if Mike Evans goes out. The problem is he also goes out a lot. And so that depressed that value. And I think he just wanted to stay in that ecosystem that has been set up around Mike Evans, around Baker Mayfield, that now has added Bucky Irving. And I think the most underrated part of this, which is ironic given that the Eagles just won the Super Bowl and people were giving the tackles all their love, is that they have like 2 of the top 10 tackles in the league. Tristan Wirfs is probably a top 2 tackle in the league, and Luke Gedeke is a very, very underrated player. And I think when you have the 2 tackles and when you have the quarterback, you kind of have to make moves to ensure you have the ecosystem around there. And they, for my money, other than T. Higgins, got the best wide receiver on the market to stay. And that has to be the best, because even if he plays 8 to 10 games, that's 8 to 10 games of top tier wide receiver talent. We're talking about Mike Evans. We're talking about Godwin, and adding in an ascendant Jalen McMillan. You really have a great offensive squad there at every single position group.
Yeah, I think it was Eric Eager who did research in the past that showed an offense is more correlated with how good a wide receiver 2 is than how good a wide receiver 1 is, because when it comes to playoff time, there's teams that will devote almost all their resources towards stopping your wide receiver 1. And when it matters is when you can throw your number 2, your number 3 at them. And the Bucs have addressed that really well, because most people would say Mike Evans is their 1A with Chris Godwin being their 1B. But when you have a 1B and a team sells out to stop Mike Evans, they still have to defend Chris Godwin. They still have to defend Jalen McMillan, who had a great back half of his rookie year. And so I agree with you that you're getting Chris Godwin on a hometown discount whenever your team is probably the best in the division and will probably stay the best in the division for a few years, barring some weird draft stuff going on. But I think the Bucs, are just in a great position. And by maintaining Chris Godwin, they are really keeping themselves in that position.
Yeah, I'll even take it a step further, because I know Eric also did research to indicate that wide receiver 3 is even very predictive. And they probably are in the top 5 of wide receiver 3 options if you add in their tight end situation as well. And it's funny, because you look at the Eagles, who we talked about winning the Super Bowl, they dealt with the wide receiver 3 problem all last year. And they have 2 of the biggest, best top tier wide receivers. And they still had an ineffective pass offense for most of the year because they just didn't have that third guy. And I think the Buccaneers, particularly as I kind of set up in this division that is sitting kind of in limbo and can be won by, 9 or 10 wins per season, when you have all three of those guys set, it really is going to make, your preseason win total look good.
All right, so let's transition into going team by team. And
Yep.
things are a little bit confusing because the Panthers are higher in draft order. The Saints are lower in NFC South standings. But let's start with the Panthers because I think that they are a little bit more clear on what to do than the Saints. So let's see if we can be smooth here and cover what they've done in free agency so far.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So pretty much the story of their free agency, in my opinion, is the fact that they missed out on Milton Williams and they almost did everything they could to make up for missing out on him in the aggregate by signing Patrick Jones, by signing Bobby Brown, by signing Tershawn Wharton. But there's a lot of moves they made aside from that. One of my favorite in particular is getting Rico Dowdle for 1 year, $3 million. And that's obviously not starter money. But with what happened with, the injuries for the Panthers, I think it makes a lot of sense to have a backup running back behind their running back one. And so why don't you kind of give me your favorite move that they made or any move that they might have made that's most notable that we can potentially use to address what we can cover in the draft?
So I think they're enacting a 2-year plan here, which Dave Canales kind of alluded to at the owners' meetings. But they clearly wanted to see what they had in Bryce last year. And so they invested lots of money in the interior offensive line. They stuck with their tackles, who they had invested heavily in, both draft capital in the case of Vicky Ekwonu and just money in the case of Taylor Moton. They went and got running backs. They went and got wide receivers in the draft. And it, for the most part, worked out. Now it's time to fix that 32nd rate defense. And I think they put the bones in place and are approaching it in such a way where they are picking up high quality guys at positions that you can get high quality guys in free agency. And I'm expecting that they're going to make big swings at the defensive quality, at the defensive premium positions in the draft. And so the top one right there that you're looking at, Tershawn Wharton, is my favorite. This is a guy who popped in a lot of our Sumer scores. You're talking about his all-in-one pass rush Sumer score, 79th percentile, starter level, 32nd. Finishing, same story, like not necessarily one of the most elite players, but certainly a certified starter level guy, and run defense as well. And he was a core piece for the Chiefs. And I think the Chiefs are really going to miss him. And I think he's really going to fit in well. Similar items with like Bobby Brown and Morick, where it's just guys who can fill roles at premium positions, at non-premium positions at cost, which I think is very helpful. And then the last one, obviously, extending J.C. Horn, probably a little expensive, but it's very difficult to get great cornerbacks in free agency. And so I think that was probably a smart move as well.
Yeah, I think they extended J.C. Horn to kind of get ahead of the curve because they were anticipating all of the Sauce Gardners and the Pat Surtains and guys like that getting extended, as early as possible. And like you said, he did have some injury concerns in the past, and so it may be a little bit overpriced, but you need good cornerbacks. And J.C. Horn, when he's actually healthy, is a great cornerback. And one thing I love is just the fact that we get to see Eric Eager practice what he preaches here, because for a long time he's talked about how defense is a weak link system. And so it's important to throw as many darts as you can at those positions. And that's what they're doing. They're not splashing for the hot new guy who is going to get $26 million like a Milton Williams, who obviously is a great player, but you are addressing all of these key needs so that when you go into the draft, you are not desperately having to reach for some position that may be a bit of an overdraft. And so I think they've done a great job so far there.
Yeah, I agree. And to your point, I think when you see a team pointedly enacting a plan, it's so rare.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the idea that the Panthers have not only enacted a plan, but for the most part, it's worked in the past year with their new kind of regime, who's like, again, kind of new. Like Dan Morgan had been in the building. Brant and Eric obviously also Brant Tillis coming in from the Chiefs, Eric coming in from your very own Sumer Sports. Those 30 guys coming in, enacting a plan, and then following up on it, I think is better than just throwing darts, to a certain degree. And so I'm going to be really interested to see where they go in the draft this year, but it seems like defense is on the menu.
Agreed. So let's cover their depth chart now.
Yeah.
And we'll start with their offense. I know we've talked a little bit about defense, but they have some needs on offense. I do think that Xavier Legette obviously has the physical talent, and there were some flashes of the reason why the Panthers did draft him, but he also did have some concerns with drops, even though drops tend to be a little noisy. Adam Thielen, the ageless wonder, I don't even know what season he's in, but he's been around for a while, and he's still been a relatively dependable slot receiver. Obviously, quarterback is pretty much set up with Bryce Young, and then they addressed both of their running back needs with Daddle and extending Chuba. Do you have any immediate needs we may need to address for the offense for the Panthers?
So I think everyone is highlighting the wide receiver position. If I had to take a guess, I think they're actually probably fine with their wide receiver situation. You have multiple guys in there that I think they trust or trust to develop, which they probably trust Thielen the most. I think they trust that Legette and Coker are going to be guys who can grow into at least a wide receiver 2. And then guys like David Moore and other people down the roster, I would suspect that maybe they take a dart throw at wide receiver, but I'd expect it to be later. The place where I think people aren't realizing that they may have a big need, particularly if Kelvin Banks, Will Campbell, some of these guys start falling, is the left and right tackle positions. Ike Ekwonu, they're going to have to make a decision on probably like now. Like just finished his 3rd year. They're going to have to make a decision about his 5th-year option. And it's going to be really interesting to see what they do there. And then on the flip side, Taylor Moton, their veteran, is basically going into a contract year. And so I think there's going to be a lot of evaluation on them. And I would not be shocked if they do stray from their defensive approach if there is a guy who is far and away the best available on the board at the tackle position. That's really the standout to me. I also think that they're pretty set in and confident in their tight end depth as well. And I think that kind of probably offsets the wide receiver position. I thought Jatavian Sanders did show flashes. And I think Tommy Tremble is more of a kind of HF type guy, but I think they also believe in him. And so I do think the deck is kind of there for Bryce Young to continue to develop as he did late last year.
Yeah, I think that's a great point with the receivers, especially because, I mean, they're not amazing at receiver now, but I almost think drafting receiver is a vote of no confidence for the receivers they've already invested a lot in, like with guys like Coker and Legette. And so I think they're probably going to delay that by 1 year. And if things don't work out with either of those two, they may go receiver next season. But I don't think it's the most immediate need because honestly, towards the back half of last year, Bryce Young had a pretty explosive offense. And, some of that may have been poor competition, but I do think that they can be solid enough with how their offense is looking so far, minus the tackle situation you laid out, to really focus more on defense just because that seems to be the more pressing need.
Yep.
So let's transition to defense. And they invested a lot of free agency in defense, given all of the orange that's on the screen here. But Derek Brown has been one of their more dependable guys. Obviously, their free agency acquisitions, Bobby Brown III, and then Tershawn Wharton. You laid out how he was pretty underrated. And then Jadeveon Clowney, he's been around for a long time, but he's a pretty dependable stopgap sort of outside linebacker. And then DJ Wanham, previously out of Minnesota a few seasons ago. He's fine. I do find it kind of funny that they've gotten both DJ Wanham and Patrick Jones, who are kind of mid-tier edge rushers from Minnesota. But we've obviously talked about how they have some needs at defense. Is there maybe like the most immediate need that you see on the screen that we should address in the draft?
So I think it's edge rusher. Yeah. I think that's what most people have them mocked to go. I think whoever falls to them is going to be excellent. And this is a great draft to need an edge rusher because there's probably 8 that are going to go in the first round that are all pretty good. I also think they're in a unique position should they want to trade down and add more draft capital. I think the thing that people really overlook with this defense is that they paid Derek Brown, who was an excellent player, and then he immediately got hurt. And I think this defense is going to look a lot different with Derek Brown and some renewed depth at the interior defensive line positions. Like I see 5 to 6 guys that can play snaps for you here. And really led by Derek Brown and Tershawn Wharton and A'Shawn Robinson. Those are 3 guys who can eat up the majority of snaps there. Bobby Brown, excellent nose tackle. Shy Tuttle, getting a little older, but also has been productive in his career. And so I think if you have that mix of guys, you can really set yourself up well to add even a swing guy. Maybe if Jalen Walker falls to them, a guy who has some question marks about where he's actually going to play, but in the setup of their defense probably projects to be a pretty good edge rusher and a guy who can be kind of a swing guy off the ball and be moved around because people are going to have to deal with Derek Brown kind of as the primary element of their front.
So let's transition into the mock draft here. And before I get started, I wanted to ask you, do you think we should maybe go slow at the start? And I know the PFF mock draft simulator gets a little crazy at times, but if maybe an Abdul Carter falls or if a Travis Hunter falls, do you think we should anticipate trading up, or do you think it's probably best to just go to our pick and then potentially trade back or stick and pick?
Yeah, I'd be shocked if they trade up, frankly.
Yeah.
I don't think that they'll reap the value from some of the blue chip players that other teams would, per se, if that makes sense. Especially given their kind of plan of attack that it seems to be. I think they're probably sticking or trading down, if anything.
Yeah. Perfect. All right. So we'll keep things on turbo for now, but settings are the same as they've been this whole series, and Panthers are picking 8 overall. So we'll get things started, and Cam Ward and Shadur both go back-to-back. Travis Hunter, Genty. All right. So, okay. I don't think this is happening.
Yeah. So in this situation, and before Carter was looked at as like the consensus number one, maybe kind of still in the college football playoffs, it was basically like, let's pray that Abdul Carter falls to us. So in this situation, I think they certified go to Abdul Carter for the same reason that I just said that Jalen Walker would be of interest to them. That you have a guy who you don't necessarily have to lean on to be an excellent run stopper because you do have Derek Brown. And that's kind of Abdul Carter's real question mark is, he didn't look great when trying to stop a power run game against Minnesota, for example. But he has those excellent top end traits when it comes to pass rushing, and he was immensely productive when you're looking at stuff like Sumer scores, or you're looking at stuff like we have on our draft guide on sumersports.com. And so in this situation, you nail Abdul Carter. And then otherwise, if you were to scroll down, you're thinking about guys like Jalen Walker, Mikael Williams. I'd consider Jihad Campbell. I'd be shocked if they went with Jihad Campbell because he's more of an old school interior linebacker that has edge potential, but has never really shown it massively. But I think you're in that realm of the edge rushers at that point.
Yeah, and just to talk a bit about Abdul Carter, but before I do that, for those who have not already checked it out, the Sumer Sports Draft Guide is one of the coolest things out there right now. I've been able to look at it, and it just has so much depth in all their stats, and it's a very, very good time to flex your draft knowledge on your friends if you just pull that up and read almost every stat you see there. But with Abdul Carter, I think, like you mentioned, he's one of the safer prospects in this entire draft, because some people say this draft isn't as good as it is in years past, but there are some blue chip guys, and I think he is one of them. Aside from the whole run stopping, which has been a little bit of a question mark with him of the past, he's been an edge rusher for 1 year, and he's made that Micah Parsons transition in college as opposed to the NFL like Parsons has. And he's been so productive in the span of 1 year. You can see the growth over the course of like 3 or 4 games, which speaks to not only how hard of a worker he is off the field, but also how physically talented he is. And so, if he falls to 8, this is hopefully a 0 seconds in, instantly sprint that pick in. Abdul Carter, come on down to the Panthers. And we'll go a little faster here just because don't anticipate trading up. But we have 57, 74, and then a few picks after that. And at 57, there are some guys that are available. Benjamin Morrison, I think he's one of the best on-tape cornerbacks in this entire draft. The only thing that people are worried about is the hip injury, and teams are going to be much more educated than us on it. But I think teams tend to overestimate how impactful injuries may be. Do you think Benjamin Morrison is going to be the pick here?
I think in this context, it makes sense given kind of how their cornerbacks have laid out. It's also clear that they want to lock in the linebacker position as well. They went ahead and got Christian Roseboom this year. That being said, Josie Jewell, Trevin Wallace no longer have Shaq Thompson. I think maybe a high, honestly, the person who's sticking out to me here is Carson Schlesinger, because he seems like a guy who is a real swing pick and has the athletic traits to kind of pop at the next level, but isn't necessarily a guy that like people are going to know. So, like maybe let's take a swing here. Maybe let's take a guy like Carson Schlesinger, who is a little interesting. I do think that there's probably a lot more question marks from the injury perspective with Ben Morrison as compared to other players. So, let's take a swing here. Let's go against the analytics a little bit. Let's dive into the athletic traits with Schlesinger.
I do think Sam's revealing his linebacker bias just a little bit. For those who weren't aware, Sam did play linebacker throughout college, and so maybe that's why. But no, I think that's a great pick. Yeah, Schlesinger, he has a little bit of pass rush versatility. He's not going to be a guy who's playing edge all the time, but he's great against the run. And like you said, he's just someone you can really trust, which is going to be super important for a team that has a pretty leaky defense so far. But with the first two picks we've made, I think it's going to be much, much better.
Certainly.
All right, so it's 74. We can go defense. There are a lot of receivers that I do like. Kyle Williams a few days ago was actually, you could get him in like the 6th round. I don't think that's happening anymore. I think he's a great receiver on tape. But this seems like a sweet spot to really take receiver if you want to go that. But I know you did mention tackle being a need. And let's see who's available there. Charles Grant is someone who's great against the run. Marcus Mbo, he has a really weird tape because his technique is much, much different than your average tackle player. So I'll leave it up to you, Sam. Do you feel like going receiver? Do you feel like going tackle? Or is there another position that you think we should address to make this team better?
So I think you look at guys like Mbo and you're starting to think about diversifying into the offensive side of the ball. This is where the kind of spread of the draft kind of starts coming in, right? And the pick curve starts getting flatter. You start to think about taking guys that maybe can fill a need or can just be a high level prospect. And one of those guys I think that is really interesting is Cameron Williams from Texas. This is a guy who, has all the tools and traits. We're talking 6'6", 317, but it's just a question of like, can he do it at the next level to a certain degree? Like he doesn't really have any badges on our page. Like a guy like Wyatt Millum would be more of the analytical pick, who has he's just a guy who pops really analytically, but really struggled at the Senior Bowl, for example, and that's why we've seen him drop. So I don't know, Asa. I'll let you make a selection here. You think they're going to go tackle or maybe defense, or do you think perhaps this is a spot where the wide receivers are starting to pile up? Where do you think they're going to go?
Let me see. So there is a little bit of a gap between 74 and 111, but I do think there are a lot of kind of sleeper receivers. Like this receiver class is not incredible, but there are a lot of guys that have like big red flags, but they have these really bright green spots. A guy like Dante Thornton, who is 6'5" and runs a 4.3. And obviously athleticism is not everything, but guys like that, you have to salivate a little bit when you just see how athletically gifted they are. I think tackle here is a good spot, and this is analytics with Asa, so I feel comfortable going Wyatt Millum. As you can see here, not just the Sumer Sports grades being great, but also his PFF grades. He's great against zone, not amazing against gap, but the NFL now is such a zone-heavy league now that doesn't matter quite as much. And athletically, he was pretty solid. He is 6'6", 317, which to me is great tackle size. And so, Wyatt Millum, I think, would be a great pick for the Panthers here.
Yeah, basically what we have him as like a bulldozer, which is an excellent run blocking Sumer score. And then we also have him as a brick wall, which is an excellent pass blocking Sumer score. So he kind of has that, and it shows up in kind of the more basic metrics. You're talking about a very low pressures allowed rate, a pretty high team time to throw when he's on the field, which obviously like guys like Will Campbell have a pretty low time to throw, but the elements that he brings, I think would be helpful in like the 3rd, 4th, or 5th round.
Yeah. And I think teams I think they're a little bit overconfident whenever they're so invested in drafting in athletes, because obviously the NFL is made up of athletes. But to me, if your choice is between two guys and one of them has amazing technique and has great production and the other is this like raw athlete, most of the time I'm going to trust the technique guy, just because the athlete has not shown to me that they can do it yet. And obviously the upside may be higher with the athlete, but to me, whenever your technique is so stellar and your production is great, to me, that's just the perfect pick to make.
Yeah, I totally agree.
All right. So next up, we can almost have our cake and eat it here too, with Kyle Williams being the receiver available. He is PFF's 63rd ranked player, and a lot of people have him higher than that. Notably, Chris Sims has him as his, I think, wide receiver 2, which is really, really high. But I think he's great here. Is there anyone else that you would prefer over Kyle Williams?
So the thing that I worry about with Kyle Williams is that when it comes to what I like to call combine risers, so that's guys like at the combine that everyone starts talking about, and they're like, "Oh, this player's great." And then all of a sudden he rises up, like you said, it's something like 100 picks, despite most people like not having him that high on their consensus. Like you look at the Athletics consensus big board, he's not in the top 100. So it's like this really interesting dichotomy of the trends, their actual, tape, which has been out there since October, and just people talking. And so we've done studies, in particular, my friend Ben Brown, who's now at ESPN Bet, like typically when you start rising up after the combine, it's a slightly negative correlation to your actual production. And so a guy like Kyle Williams does scare me a little bit, because it's like, why didn't you realize he was that good when he was playing?
Yeah.
And so that's why I get a little worried about him. Is Kevin Winston available by chance? Safety from Penn State?
Let's see. He is not. I think, Sanker and Billy Bowman. They have Ransall listed as a safety, which to me he's a little bit more of a cornerback, but yeah, unfortunately, when did he go? He might have gone relatively recently.
Yeah, because he's sitting around that like 80 mark, and he really popped up in our grades, in our Sumer scores this year. So he was of interest to me, right? So if like I'm looking at the names, Kyle Williams makes sense to a certain degree. I don't think Jaden Blue makes a lot of sense. I don't think Harold Fannin makes a lot of sense. I think Harold Fannin is a 49er, brother. This is where you just kind of start asking questions of like, where do we go? And this, I mean, like, frankly, this is also where the projections start getting like a little low. And so you look at guys like Billy Bowman, you look at guys like Fannin, for example, like all of them have like a core big question about them, for example. So I think they're going to probably stick with defense in this range. I'm fine with Billy Bowman. But again, like you're starting to get into the hundreds, right? Like these guys are starting to have really big questions.
Yeah. And I think with defense, you could also pair that up with, there's a lot of feisty cornerbacks. Actually, the one that I was really looking at actually just went at 113 with Kobe Bryant. He's a really small guy, but he's a guy I personally love a lot because he's 175 pounds and he's great against the run, which to me is such a cool combo because you just don't care that you're 100 pounds lighter than the people who are trying to block you. But yeah, with the concept of combine risers or people that are rising, there's kind of a trend with film bros. And I don't say film bros as like the guys who like Stanley Kubrick movies. I say film bros as the football guys who really like analyzing tape and breaking things down. And, to be honest, I don't necessarily trust all of those people because typically they don't have an NFL background. But I think Kyle Williams, to me, his upside is high enough to where he's worth the investment just because, we are in the 4th round and people do like him a lot. But I think you do bring up a great point that just because a guy rises, especially when he's done playing games, it does tend to be a little bit of a red flag to just assume he's going to be at whatever position people are projecting him at.
It's a great point. And like the people that I trust, shout out to like EJ Snyder, Brett Coleman from the Bootleg podcast, like they tipped me off to Kyle Williams very early. So it is like you mentioned, it's like an interesting mix of people really like this guy, but on the flip side, like the data is the data to a certain degree, and so it becomes questionable. I think it would probably make sense to go with a guy like Kyle Williams right here. What I'm trying to figure out right now is like where he was. Because like basically there's like all these theories you get as a guy who's outside of the building, and it's like, if I had my report done on him in December, for example, like would I have given him basically around a top 100 grade, for example? And like I'm just looking at 128, he was ranked 248, and so it's like, maybe we wait to see if he keeps dropping, but I think here is probably safe to take a guy like Kyle Williams.
No, I think that's fair. We can go Kyle Williams for now, but I do think you bring up great points that it's like you just can't assume these guys are going to be great just because they rise whenever they haven't even played games. I do realize we've yapped a lot about the top earlier picks, but given the fact that the talent pool is a little bit less, we can go a tiny bit quicker here. At the 140 spot, I think we could still easily go defense, but there are a few offensive guys available. Is there anyone here?
Oh man, I'm really sad we went Kyle Williams. We should have gone something else, because I do want to talk a little bit about Torrey Horton, who is a guy who has been immensely productive at Colorado State and has dealt with some injuries, but like this is a guy who was a real difference maker and people thought could potentially be a first round pick kind of in the middle of last year. And man, I wish I would have thought about it a little bit deeper, because it also feels like a guy like Ricky White may be available here, who is an absolute animal. And frankly, for the reasons I kind of outlaid, I kind of like those two guys better than I'd like a Kyle Williams, for example. But I think edge, like doubling down on the edge position, is probably a smart move if any of those guys are available. I don't know if I saw any, but again, like this is the place where you start adding in guys. No one's really catching up. Fadil Diggs, maybe, he's in that area. He can kind of do both. He's like like you'd be jumping 100 spots. This is also an excellent interior defensive line draft. So let's check who's available there.
Let's see what we got. Tonka Hemingway,
yeah.
I do like.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy. Ty Robinson's another guy who I've had eyes on. Junior Tafuna also. It's going to be tough to jump. This is where the trades start flying, right? So it's like, take who you can and get away with it. I'll let you make this pick, Asa, because no one's really jumping out to my eye at all.
Yeah, I'm cool with going Jack Kaiser here. Really good run defender. And we already did go linebacker early. But to me, I think it's worth it to just ensure that you're feeling safe at that position. And we are in the 5th round. And so at this point, it's mainly just taking dart throws.
Right.
All right. So 146. We are just a few picks later. At this point, we did already go receiver.
There's all these quarterbacks popping up. And I actually wouldn't be shocked if they took a quarterback in like the 5th to 7th rounds, because like I said, same thing with Ike Ekwonu, they have to start making decisions about Bryce Young. And if they really like Riley Leonard, for example, I actually, or a Kyle McCord or something like that, I think that would be an excellent pick. And like the name that keeps catching my eye here is Riley Leonard, because not the most productive on the ground, but if you're talking about a high floor backup, that's going to be Riley Leonard. This dude is excellent at running the ball. And so it has like kind of the tool set to be an NFL quarterback at the next level. Obviously, like he wasn't super elite in anything last year. He did have a decent completion percentage over expected, was pretty good in terms of sack avoidance, but I don't really know if they'd take a top like 150 pick. Let's go back to the consensus board.
Yeah, it's mainly just receivers at this point.
Yeah, and like this is the place where the draft, like I think that's an interesting pick right there, like going guard or something like that. Because,
Yeah.
but like you said, I'll probably let you take the reins on this one as well, because it's
Mhm.
just like this is where like analyst Sam starts coming out, and it's like take the guy who looks the best, or
Yeah.
take the
Yeah.
guy who fits the most in with your scheme, or take the guy who you think has the best potential, right?
Mhm.
Because it starts getting really sticky because you're really taking dart throws, or better yet, try to be Howie Roseman and just try to trade back as many times as you possibly can and turn, pick 100 whatever into pick 80 next year, and try to turn pick
Mhm.
80 next year into pick 60 the year after that. And so that's where this is where like kind of the breaks of the game kind of start coming in.
No, absolutely. And yeah, at this point, like you said, it's really just take your guys. And what I like about being late in the draft is that everyone tends to have different guys. And so, like you
Right.
said, whenever you're trading back, you can get a lot of draft capital and you can get way more dart throws if you're willing to do that, because the difference between a 6th round pick and a 7th round pick in terms of the player is not typically much at all. But the way that teams value it tends to be 6th round picks are like a little more valuable than 7th round picks, but you can typically trade back like 1/6 for 2/7, especially if it's later in the draft. And so, yeah, I would do that, but we already have gone almost an hour on the Panthers total, so we can really just pick a guy that we like the most here. And I think Riley Leonard actually just went. I don't know. How do you feel about yours? I know a lot of people don't love him.
I think if you're at this spot, I'd rather McCord. I think
Okay,
McCord
yeah.
has a better upside. I
Mhm.
think McCord has improved massively in the past year. McCord lights up pretty much every single thing that you can possibly light up, including some negative ones like
Mhm.
interceptions. I would be more confident going McCord than Ewers. I just think Ewers had the tools to be excellent, had the environment to be excellent, and it just never worked out. And frankly, I think they would have been better off last year playing Arch a lot more.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like if you're struggling whenever you have Texas's team, then yeah, and you're going to get drafted by some team that's probably not going to be the best team in football. And the talent discrepancy in college is so much higher than the talent discrepancy in the NFL. It doesn't make sense to expect Ewers to really do too much, at least given how his career has been so far. All
Right.
right, and then finally we have the 230 spot. Um, we already did go receiver. I do like LeJontay Wester as a slot to maybe back up Thielen, even though Thielen's probably 40, 50 pounds heavier.
Yeah, I
Um,
also like Theo
yeah, go.
Weiss as a guy who
Mhm.
probably there's actual value. I think that him and Luther Burden were hurt massively by Brady Cook's regression last year.
Yeah.
And I also think that like he added, if they would have had better quarterback play and a little bit more effective of an offensive plan, I think that he would have been a guy who rise. He is coming off like a broken hand, I believe he had at the Shrine Bowl. So
Mhm.
there's a little risk there, but like, what are we in the 7th round? Like, I
Yeah.
think he could actually be a pretty good selection.
Yeah. I think that makes perfect sense. So Theo Weiss at the 230. So let me ask you this first. What grade would you give us in the draft? And then what grade do you think PFF would give us in the draft?
I mean, I think Abdul Carter is really all that matters here
Yeah, agreed.
to a certain degree. And like, again, not trying to be wet blanket analyst guy about the draft and about dart throws, but like the fact that you got one of the two people that teams think are blue chip players is like really all that matters in
Mhm.
this draft. Um, so I don't know. I mean, like maybe a B minus, B plus.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I guess they didn't love the Wyatt Millum. They liked Kyle Williams, but I think that's just PFF liking him more than consensus. Overall, A minus. I will gladly take that. I think that's relatively accurate to what I would give this draft. I think you address most of the immediate needs with Abdul Carter being your edge rusher, with Carson being your linebacker, and then you're getting better in the secondary with Billy Bowman to pair along with J.C. Horn being at cornerback.
Yeah.
I think this draft was pretty good.
Yeah, and again, we're approaching this from like the prospect and team side. Like,
Mhm.
obviously, if you're in the building, you're going to have your board, you're going to have the consensus board, and you're going to stick pretty tight to that. Like, we're kind of just like shooting the breeze about these guys because we like to talk about them. So,
Yeah.
A minus, I'll take it. But I think really the difference making pick was the top pick, and I think that's probably going to be the way it works out for them as well.
Mhm. So let's transition to the Saints, and they made not too many moves, just given the fact that their cap situation is still a little bit in flux there. Like you mentioned, they're still almost living in like the ashes of the whole Drew Brees era of football. They do sign Justin Reed. They do re-sign Chase Young, which is a move I like a lot. He didn't live up to the best edge rusher prospect of the past 10 years that some people were anticipating him to be, but he's been relatively productive in the time he's been with New Orleans. Do you have a favorite move that the Saints may have made?
It's tough, like I think they're locked into a team that is aging, but a team that also has young stars that if they could keep healthy, it would be great. I mean, you think about guys like Shaheed and Olave, and there's a lot of youth there. Like nothing really stuck out to me. I think these are all moves that are basically still trying to build around the team that they have necessarily. Like you could say that the Chase Young re-sign was pretty valuable. I like the trade for Devon Godshaw, bring him back to Louisiana, obviously, which interestingly, like of late, Sean Payton was like notably never had Louisiana players on the team. And so it's really interesting. Will Clapp is another guy that pops up. I think they just did what they kind of had to do to keep the roster moving forward and keep themselves in contention for the South while kind of starting to move into a different period of this Saints team.
Yeah, and they're still in the process of recovering from the whole financial situation, hence why they didn't make a lot of crazy moves. So I'm almost glad they didn't, because there are some instances where they're pushing more cap into the future. They did not really do a ton of that this season, which I'm a little bit proud of Mickey Loomis for not doing. But let's talk about their offense here. Chris Olave, amazing wide receiver, and he was a home run of a draft selection. The issue with him, I think, is the concern about the injuries. And similarly with Rashid Shaheed, who had a breakout season last year. He was someone I drafted in fantasy football, was very happy about selecting because he was great. But he also had injury issues. And so do you feel like going receiver for this selection? Do you feel like going offensive line? Or do you want to get fun here and go Shedeur and potentially trade up for him?
So it depends on what your evaluation is. And I think what all these teams are kind of betting that are in their quarterback market, particularly at the top of the draft, I've thought about this deeply, and I wrote in detail why Shedeur would get pushed up, potentially even all the way to the top pick.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that separately, all the sharp teams are also looking at the board and looking at who needs quarterbacks and all these free agency moves. And the bet is no longer, do I think Shedeur is good? The bet is, when do I think I can get Shedeur?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a lot of teams are going to be optimizing off of what the Jets and the Saints do, for example, and like way down the board, but what the Steelers do. And so I, as a Saints fan, would be interested in having Shedeur. I think it's probably like it's a quality pick given, depending on what you look at, he's the certified quarterback 2 in this draft consensus. He could be anywhere from 4 to 24 or 34 in anybody's any given draft big board. And so I think, like, looking at the team, you have 2 wide receivers, right? Last year, the team took a nosedive when those 2 guys got hurt, and all of a sudden it was practice squad guys. So I would really kind of look for them to go Tet McMillan if he's in the range.
Mm-hmm.
And then ironically, that's not going to happen. I'd be shocked. But like, if there was ever a time for Mickey Loomis to trade back, this is the time.
Yeah, agreed.
But I think they're in an interesting scenario where they can kind of draft the best person available / fit a targeted need. The success of this team, I think, totally relies on if Derek Carr can be feasible, but what it really relies on is if the 2 tackles can continue to progress. Fuaga and Penning weren't the most productive guys of all time last year, but they did put together a pretty good run offense, and both of them, the young tackles, were a big portion of that. And we did see some progression of Trevor Penning at the right tackle position. I think I'm a little bit more confident that Fuaga will end up being a second contract Saints guy, but the real basis of this entire team, I think, is the 2 tackle positions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I think there's a wide variety of selections we could make here
Right.
because it's almost the opposite of the Eagles, where the Eagles have so many good players at every position that you can go BPA. I think with the Saints, it's not necessarily that they have so many holes, but long term, they're going to need a lot of different players. And so you can go receiver, you can go quarterback. As long as you don't go running back, I think you're going to be okay. But let's transition to the defense here. And that is going to be there's a lot going on with the defense. So probably their biggest free agency acquisitions were on the defensive side. Cam Jordan has been around for forever, and we're probably going to need to draft a guy who can, replace him long term. Demario Davis has been around for some time as well. Tyrann Mathieu, another guy who was from Louisiana that's coming back here. Do you have any needs that they should address on the defensive side?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just have to look at the cornerback position and say that none of these guys, except for maybe Kool-Aid and Alante, are going to be long-term guys.
Mhm.
And Alante was one of the most targeted guys in the league last year. Wasn't immensely effective, but has high upside. I think everyone kind of agrees on that. But like, at what point is he going to cash in on that upside is the real question. Kool-Aid ended up playing a lot of snaps. Just continue to let him develop. I think that you'd probably want to keep adding to that cornerback position. I think Will Johnson is going to be in the area. I think that'd be of interest for them.
Yeah. All right. So let's transition to the draft here. And the Saints are picking 9 overall. And let's jump right in. So the real question comes up now. Are we trading up for Shedeur Sanders, or should we stick and pick? Or should we just go slow, see if Shedeur falls past maybe 3 or 4, and then trade up if that becomes of interest?
So I think that they are actually a team that in real life would probably start getting antsy and maybe trade up. The key spots is probably 5 with the Jaguars, because I think the Jaguars are in a unique position where they probably feel like they can trade back and collect assets. They do have a larger analytics organization, so that may be of interest to them, even though that's also headed up by the CEO of AEW, which can put on a swell pay-per-view. I can tell you that. Great wrestling from Tony Khan. But also trading up in this scenario could be cataclysmic to the rest of your franchise, because getting up into the top 5 will probably require this year's first, probably a down the line second or third, and maybe a first down the line. And I just don't think that if you truly believe that Sanders and or Ward would be, the 5th or 6th quarterback off the board last year, it just does not make sense to trade up, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think we can go slow and see maybe if they're willing to take a discount at 5. That could be a possibility, but I agree that trading up to 2 is going to cost way too much, especially for a franchise that has a lot of immediate needs. So I'm comfortable with starting out. Let's go.
Yeah, and like, moreover, if my kind of entire standpoint right after the season to now has been, if I'm the Titans or the Browns, I'm calling anyone who will listen. I'm prank calling people to try to get someone to trade up.
Yeah. All right, let's start. Okay, so Cam and Shedeur both go 1 and 2. So at this point, it's really just address a need you like better. And your guy Ted McMillan is still here. If you
I think that's the selection.
We can. Yeah. Okay. Ted, I think he's one of the safer receiver prospects. I know people compare him a lot to Mike Evans just because he's really tall and he can catch balls that are contested. But I think he's very smooth in a similar way to Mike Evans. But I just think that, to me, he's one of the safer prospects in this draft, just because people, I guess, were concerned with the 40 time. He ran a fine 40 time on the field. He actually runs quite a bit faster than that. And I just think he's a great player. And so I think he would be perfect for them. And if your guys like Olave and Shaheed end up being healthy, you have one of the best receiver cores in football if Tet ends up hitting. If he is not, then I think you still shore up a need that you're going to have in the future.
I think setting the high end as Mike Evans, who's going to probably be a first ballot Hall of Famer, is a little high.
Agreed.
I think like if he can get to 75% of T. Higgins's production, because T. Higgins is another guy who's like not separating a ton, but is still an active player, particularly given he's paired with Jamar Chase. And I think that's kind of the scenario we'd like to have here. The Saints just cannot have another year where they're playing dudes from Yale at the wide receiver position. Like that you just can't have a good football team when you're doing that. So I think Tet McMillan's probably the move here. I'd also like just looking at it and looking and understanding, like I know they re-signed Jawan Johnson. I know they had Foster Moore. Like a tight end could be interesting as well, but I think that's the pick here.
Yeah. Armand Mimbu did fall, which is a little bit interesting, but I don't think tackle's quite as immediate of a need as wide receiver for now. I think in the future it definitely could be, but yeah, I think Tet is one of the safer picks. I think he'd be perfect for the Saints here. All right, and then we will speed things up at this point. The mock draft simulator does this sometimes where if you set it at a speed, it sticks at that for a little bit, and then hopefully it'll speed up after that. But Saints are picking at 40 overall, and in my opinion, this is a great spot to be picking because you have guys like Savon Ravel or Trey Amos falling. And to me, it's really between both of those guys because they're both incredible. Do you have a preference between the athletic freak versus the perfect technique guy?
Yeah, I think Savon Ravel is probably the pick here. When you're thinking about Brandon Staley, you're thinking about a defense that actually will end up looking a little bit like Vic Fangio's, where you're going to play a lot. Like you're not going to ask the cornerbacks to be Darrelle Revis. And I think that's why we were able to see the young cornerback from Toledo last year for the Eagles be so good. And honestly, like I know Sean Syed, who is like covers the Eagles with Shil Kapadia. He's with us at Sumer Sports, Stats and Scheme podcast. He is like Savon Ravel is like, please go to the Eagles. And I think that's a great fit for the Saints as well.
I agree. And similarly with a guy like Benjamin Morrison, there is a little bit of an injury concern, but in my opinion, a hip is not nearly as bad as, a hip is a lot worse than an ACL typically is, just because technology's gotten so much better about addressing these sort of injuries. And Savon Ravel, he's a small school guy similar to your Quinyon Mitchells, but he was so dominant, and that's what matters the most to me, is that if you're going to be playing in a small school like that, you better be dominating your opponents, and that's exactly what he did every time he was at East Carolina.
Yep.
All right, and then Benjamin Morrison falls. We are not selecting him, but I think that was pretty interesting. There is another athletic freak like Darian Porter, who is not really for today's podcast, but he's a great cornerback as well. At this point, I'm comfortable with going with one of these tackle guys that we talked about before, like an Imbo, like a Wyatt Millum, or like a Charles Grant. Do you have a guy here that you like the best out of these guys?
So I actually like Shamar Turner is right there. I actually was interested in that. Here's why. There's 3 defensive fronts this year that all have excellent guys who are probably going to go somewhere around the top 100. And look, like analytically in terms of the grade, Shamar Turner was not fantastic last year. There's also concerns about like character concerns and stuff like that. But here's what I'll say. When you look at defensive lines like that, you don't want to, parse out too much like who's actually good, but there is a probability that any given player is actually going to be good. Does that make sense? So it's like, you can't just be like, Shamar Stewart's the guy. He was the reason why Texas A&M's defensive line was so good. Like, no, they had other great guys. They had Nick Scorton. They had Shamar Turner. In the case of Ole Miss, they had Ivy out there on the edge, not just, JJ Pegues and Princely U and Walter Nolan. Same thing for the defensive line. Like, especially given they're going more to a 3-4 look question mark, like a guy like Josiah Stewart also like starting to get 71, 93, 112. I don't know where he would be is also of interest.
Man, he went 61. I would love Josiah Stewart.
Yeah, so that's what I was saying. But I actually think like a guy like Shamar Turner actually does make sense, especially given like the scheme fit to a certain degree here for the Saints.
Yeah, I think he could play like a 3-4 defensive end because some people question whether or not he would line up at defensive end or more interior. And he's been not the most productive in the world, but his hands are really heavy, which I say heavy in a good way because they're so powerful. And he's someone to me that if you're a Saints team, you're selecting guys based on upside because you have so much to build off of. And I think he would be a great pick.
He's also from New Orleans, which, they used to not bring him back, but now they do. So
yeah, but it's a new Saints team now. All right, next up we have 93, and we'll avoid Kyle Williams. But yeah, so they still have
Oh,
some needs, in my opinion. There is your Wyatt Millum. There is Jonah. I don't know exactly how to say it. Sabainia. I don't know if I'm saying
Savania.
Savanai. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, like this is a great spot for them to be in because like it's going to be like this with teams like the Saints, like the Bengals, where it just feels like everything is falling their way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so like here, I'm like, oh man, a guy like Jonas Savania or like Millum, who is like a swing guy. And we've seen the Saints really utilize swing guys in great ways back in the Peyton / Dennis Allen days. But you look at a guy like Jonas Savania, and you know, he's in that same kind of space, kind of to a certain degree. He's not quite in that top 25, which I like to see like Wyatt Millum is, but we're talking about 89th percentile pass blocking, 75th percentile run blocking. Like this is a guy who was pretty productive and also is like a swing guy, played offensive right guard in 22, right tackle in 23, both tackle spots 24. I think Savani makes a lot of sense for them here.
Yeah. And like you said, it's not an immediate need right now. You have guys who you may be able to trust, but if things don't work out with them, then a swing tackle is a perfect guy to line up as the starter, especially because being a tackle allows you to get that experience.
Yeah. And then at the same time, I keep highlighting the wide receiver position as what hurt him last year. But when Lucas Patrick went out, and especially Eric McCoy, who was basically an all-pro, he was going to make an all-pro team if it ended up like falling any which way. If you can like fill those spots with young guys, I think it's a great move. The Oladejo from UCLA is the one that's popping out to me right here. He had an excellent Senior Bowl. Like again, it's just gonna fall. This draft is just gonna fall in a way that it's guys are going to be available at places where they need them. So like Femi here is I think an interesting selection. He was a much better run defender last year than he was pass rush, according to our Sumer scores. But like it just the spirit is guiding me to these guys at the top, and I think that's the benefit of what this Saints draft is going to look like.
Yeah, it's like the most immediate needs the Saints have are all positions where it's really deep in this class. And so, yeah, whether it be edge rusher, defensive interior, tackle there's a lot of tackle guard combo guys.
Which is perfect for the Saints.
No, it definitely is. And so it's like there's teams that need a pure tackle, and that may not be the best thing for this draft, but the teams that do need that versatility is a team that the Saints would definitely want, so I think that would be perfect for them here. All right.
So we're in the tailback zone here, and there's going to be like 30 plus tailbacks that are available. And you start to think of the guys that like Kellen Moore really likes or has liked in the past. And you get into those like really elusive kind of pass catching guys as well. So you think about guys like Tony Pollard, you think about guys like Zeke, obviously to a certain degree, Saquon last year, and Trevor, like maybe this is again Louisiana bias, and Shamar Turner had nothing to do with the fact that he was from Louisiana. Trevor Etienne I have watched since he was 8. He grew up like right next to me. I played against Travis, who plays for the Jaguars now. Travis was the offensive MVP. I was defensive MVP. Like Trevor's just been immensely productive and elusive throughout his career, and he brings pass catching upside that he flashed at the Senior Bowl. And so I'm looking at Trevor Etienne right here, and I'm like, man, this is falling great for me. Plus, if sell some tickets maybe to the Jennings Louisiana faithful. But I think he just makes a lot of sense in the context of a Kellen Moore offense.
Yeah. And while we're waiting on the next pick, which we did select Trevor Etienne here, I want to show you what this draft guide looks like, because not only are the graphics very cool, but you get things like badges that show like how impactful he's been. He has a high score badge, and then it displays it by whether or not he ran in a light versus a heavy box. And all this stuff is really cool. So if you want to like riff on this a little bit, I think that would be cool to just show how impressive this draft guide is.
Yeah. So I think there's the scheme elements that coaches and scouts want to know, which is like that stuff. when you're trying to project him in the next level, you have to kind of get away from that, especially a guy like this who was at Florida and Georgia. You know, like he was playing the best guys. But the thing that sticks out to me is that blue grade EPA per rush. And again, like part of that does stick with the offensive line. Like Tate Rutledge is a guy that he played with. But the idea also, and you know, we're talking about yards after catch percentage. Typically, it's going to be over 100% at college level because they're throwing those screens like way behind the line, and there's a lot bigger screen game. Like, I think the idea that he was a green grade, which if you hover over the key, a green grade basically means that he's like certified above average. He's like pretty good. He's not necessarily elite. In the case of target share, like it doesn't really elite. Like if you have a low target share, it just means they utilize you in a different way. But the things that pop out to me and the reasons why I think he could be interesting to the Saints is, number one, this is a guy who has played in the pass game, both at Florida and Georgia. This is a guy who does have, you know, analytical metrics, tracking metrics from our Sumer scores that pop out. And then he also has a pretty good athletic profile, particularly in terms of speed. And I think that mix makes him interesting for the Saints, and in particular makes him interesting for Kellen Moore and Doug Nussmeier.
Yeah, and what I like about him especially is that you're not drafting him just because of his athletic profile, like some, you know, teams like to do, where they see a guy blow up the combine and say,
Isaac Guerendo, for example, last year.
No, exactly. And Guerendo kind of worked out, which is a little bit it's a little bit unexpected, because typically the guys who are the most productive in the NFL are the guys who are not just combine risers. And so he was productive in college. He also had a good combine, which to me is the perfect pairing when you're looking for a guy, especially in the 5th round. So I think he was great value there. And then transitioning back. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we just got hosed because I see Danny Stutzman and Jonah Moynihan, and both of those guys would have been good fits. Jonah Moynihan, another good swing offensive tackle, and Danny Stutzman, like an old school hammerhead linebacker, who I think would fit really well in that. Like I'm not going to comp him to Demario Davis, who's going to be a Hall of Famer, like a multi-time All-Pro on some of the most excellent defenses in recent memory. But like he plays with that hammer kind of style and is also like frankly underrated in coverage, but they didn't really want to utilize him in coverage. They wanted him like really hammering people. And so we kind of got hosed, because I think those two dudes are really interesting. Let's see who's on the board here. I'm not super intrigued by any of these wide receivers.
Yeah.
Dante Thornton's interesting.
He could be a flyer. This is the 6th round. But yeah, at this point, it's really just take guys you trust more than anything. And, you know, I don't hate Bransall. He was pretty productive as well. But if there's a guy you like better, that is cool with me. It's
really interesting to me that all these wide receivers are backing up. Like,
yeah, there's
that's fascinating to me, because no one really thinks it's an excellent wide receiver draft. And there's like major questions about guys like Sam Brown, Dante Thornton. I got a chance to watch him at the Shrine Bowl. And it's interesting. What are we in, like the 5th round here?
We're kind of like early 6th.
Yeah, early 6th. And I guess at this point, it's just a dart throw. The guy who did stick out to me, if you scroll down a little bit, was the tackle, Emory Jones. Yeah. Emory Jones, I think like it's hilarious that we're now about to add a third like Louisiana-based player for whatever reason. But I do think Emory Jones was part of an offensive line led by Brad Holmes in that Brian Kelly team that just was like super effective for multiple years. And I think Emory Jones was kind of a guy who I'm going to like double check before I start just like spewing, falsehoods here. But he feels like a guy who is like a dropper, like a combine dropper. But he was like fairly competitive against Shamar Stewart, for example. So like he's dropped down from 50 right after the season ended all the way down to like the 90s, 100 in terms of consensus big board, which it does include mock draft information. But like we're getting him 100 picks. Like what does it say his ADP is right there? 180?
It is 180, yeah.
That's really fascinating. And again, like this is the differences between mock draft simulators and boards and so forth and so on. He was an excellent run defender. I think he probably does have legs inside as well. And like, I'm just like, I just think this is a good pick for them. Like, they're getting a guy who has a blue chip resume at non-blue chip prices, even though like he has major questions. So I like Louisiana bias, I guess, but like I'm really not. Like, we're sticking pretty close to the consensus right here. So it's like we're not really like getting smoked in terms of the consensus. It feels like such a Doug Nussmeier, Kellen Moore pick to go Tyler Shuck there, but I can't stomach it. Like, the dude's my age. Like, I've been out of school for 4 years. Like, come on, dude. He was in my recruiting class.
Oh, was he really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
or maybe a year after. It might have been a year after, but
okay. Yeah. He's like, I think won't he be 26 on draft day or something like that?
I can't stomach it, dude. Especially when there's like other quarterbacks available. The fact that some people have him going like 33 is like sickening to me. Frankly.
Yeah.
Especially given some people have him going to the Browns. The Browns like pick only like exclusively young guys.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So. Andrew Berry. It's like Power 5 young guys is his bread and butter.
Yeah.
All right. And then for 248. So I don't know if there's anyone that you particularly like.
If we want to keep it rolling, we can go with Will Shepherd, who's from Baton Rouge. No, I'm joking. He wasn't immensely effective. He was a part of a kind of a wide receiver by committee outside of Travis Hunter. Yeah. I don't know how interesting he is. Yeah, we're really getting deep here.
Yeah.
So wait, what is the exact pick here?
We are at 248.
Okay.
So that's like towards the end of the 7th round.
248. So I'm just like gonna scroll through some guys that I can't. Is Ricky White available?
Is he? Oh, I don't.
I'm sure they like him. I'm just like looking at mock draft database.
Yeah.
And seeing who. Ricky White's my guy. Like, I'm gonna keep bringing this up. I just think he's gonna be an excellent player. Frankly, I have no clue why he dropped. What about Kane Madrano? He's like a Sam. I bet he could fill multiple.
Is it CAN or KA?
KA.
Okay.
KA.
Oh, he's not available.
KAI. Sorry.
Oh, KA. Okay. Nope. There's a punter.
Tough break. Isaiah Nader. Any YOR?
NEY.
Yeah, man, they're snapping them up.
There's not a lot out here. I don't.
I'll let you take this one. Is there anyone who you like?
I don't hate Ty Robinson. He was like relatively productive. 10% pass rush win rate is not something to really knock your socks off, but it's still better than average. And you still have needs at the defensive interior. I know we addressed that relatively early with Shamar Turner, but to me, it's just pick guys that you trust. And I think whenever you can see the production and you're picking this guy in the 7th round, to me, well, it's not going to be someone you can expect to be amazing. I think that's fine with me.
If you could like control, well, too late now, but Jared Harrison Hunt is another interesting one out of SMU who was like, he looked really good. He was pretty productive at SMU. The funny thing with those SMU guys, which like, I like follow me in this logic here and tell me if I'm wrong, but like, I think a lot of people are going to grade them as if they're G5 guys when they like won the ACC last year.
Yeah, I think they just.
And I think people are just going to forget.
Yeah,
like people are just going to forget that they were in the ACC last year. And you look at a guy like Jared Harrison Hunt, like top 20 pass rush grade, top 31 pass rush finish. In terms of our Sumer scores, that is like immensely good at finishing runs as well. Like if you want a profile of a guy who's really good, I realize he's like 6'3", 290, but like he's doing this in the ACC. I'm not talking about the American Conference anyway, of which he put up very similar numbers there too. And I get he's a little older, but I think that like that's a little bit of a thing. Like guys like Brashard Smith and some of the other SMU guys, I wouldn't expect if they fall just because people are like, oh yeah, they were in a G5 conference. No, they weren't. They literally like won a power.
They won a Power 5. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. It's like I think we could talk about this for a while, but I think you're describing a term that's like almost team inertia, where it takes a few years for a team to be really effective at whatever position they may be before they're actually respected. And SMU may just be one of those teams where they were not traditionally considered this amazing team, but you win the ACC. Like that's not something you just do by accident.
Yeah.
All right, so to break down the draft, we got a lot of A's here, and I think
Yeah.
this is not just speaking to PFF. I think it's just speaking to the fact that there's a lot of guys that fell in the consensus board that we took at great value, and we took them at
Right.
needs that the Saints may have. And so I think, honestly, this to me is an A+ draft. I think it's great for the Saints.
I mean, like we went through their depth chart. I said if the interior offensive line, defensive line, or wide receivers crash out, like we're in big trouble. And now we have swing tackles. We have guys that can fill in needs on the interior of the line, hopefully. And then we also added 2 probably first-round talents in Tet and Savon Ravel.
Yeah, and
in my view.
No, absolutely. And yeah, if it weren't for injuries, I'm sure Savon Ravel would 100% go first round. And honestly, he still may go first round. And being a Vikings fan, if they took him at 24, I would not be mad at all.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of teams sitting sub 20 that are like, oh my God, can I get that guy?
No, exactly. So let's transition to the Falcons. And we can go a little bit quicker here because the Falcons are not quite in the same dire state that the previous 2 teams were in. But they made some moves. One of their bigger ones is re-signing Mike Hughes, the first-round pick out of UCF in 2018, I believe. Yeah, Leonard Floyd was one of their edge rusher signings. Divine Diablo, the safety turned linebacker. Are there any major moves that you like that they made that may have implications in the draft?
So I don't think they really needed to shake anything up. The positions of need that they have, you can basically only get through the draft, and that's the edge rushing position. It was really interesting to me that they let Grady Jarrett go. That indicates to me that maybe they know something that we don't about injury or health or something like that. He's like decently productive last year, but like this is a guy for years that was a top defensive tackle, both analytically and eye test wise. And when the eye meets the AI, that's when you know you're like in the zone. And so perhaps they're trying to get out in front of that. The strength of this team is going to be their skill players on the offensive side of the ball. So I think you just try to optimize around that. And I think that's basically what they're trying to do.
I agree. So let's move on to their depth chart here. And yeah, like you mentioned, their skill players are great. Drake London is a great receiver who almost was like a big Cooper Kupp the way that they used him in the slot a lot last year. And he's, I think, 6'5", which to be a 6'5" slot, I think is really cool. Darnell Mooney was a great wide receiver too. Ray McLeod was also very underrated as well. Their offensive line, I think, is starting to get a little bit older, but I think their skill position players are so great, and Michael Penix was such a great selection despite the controversy that I think they're in a fine spot. And I know we talked a lot about Penix last year, but I mean, I think this pick looks great now. I think the only real concern is just the fact that Kirk Cousins is still in your roster and they want to pay him that bonus to maybe trade him in the future to a team that may need him. But yeah, I think this offense is fine.
Yeah, I think it's not going to pop up this year unless maybe the Raiders go with Shador, which my dad who I have in my podcast from time to time, who I love, like first person I ever talked about ball to, still one of my favorite people to talk about ball to. He's like, I'm telling you, the Raiders are going to draft Shador. Like they traded for an older guy. They're going to get Shador. Like that's just the way it's going to go. Pete Carroll's done this before with Matt Flynn and Russell Wilson. Obviously that was a much later pick. And he's like, that's just what's going to happen. And so I basically have a running bet with him that they're going to go Shador. The Raiders will, but I think like this is going to be something, especially as quarterbacks get older, that people are going to be able to stomach. Like the idea that you should dart throw at quarterback in the first round, which used to be like a KO death knell. If you did that, like if you do it and it goes wrong, you're done. And now people are accepting of it, even if you spend $40 million on Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, and it's like, to me, the whole controversy was not really that they drafted Penix. It was more that they signed Kirk. And I understand why they signed Kirk, because they had abysmal quarterback play for years. And now all of a sudden you get a guy who was not the best quarterback in the league, but was like a top 14-ish quarterback for like 5 straight years in Minnesota. And, you know, there was the Achilles tear, but in my opinion, it was worth the bet for them to make. You know, and so I'm glad they have Penix. I understand why they signed Kirk despite it not working out. But yeah, I think their offense is going to be pretty good.
Yeah, and as we transition to the defense, they're another team in the vein, kind of the Saints, but really of the Bengals, of like, this isn't a good skill player and quarterback draft, but it is a good edge and interior depth on both sides of the ball draft, and that's basically what they need. So like every pick's going to look good to them, because what do you really like? What's the strength of this team right now? The strength of this team is guys like AJ Terrell on the defense and Jesse Bates, and then like you got to figure out the edge rushing position. And so I think that's probably what's going to end up happening for them.
I agree. And it's like, yeah, it's the best, I think, spot in the first round, because there's going to be a James Pierce or a Mike Green or a Nick Scourton or, anyone else that you trust in that spot that you can draft early. And I think that's probably going to be the route we should go in this draft, barring some crazy fall from some player. So
100%.
Let's transition into the draft for the Falcons. They are picking at 15th, and I do not anticipate any trading up, so we'll go fast here. But it's really your pick here between Mike Green or Izaraku, unless you want to go someone else. I like Mike Green personally a little bit better as a player on the field, not necessarily off the field. But yeah, the pick is yours, Sam.
So I think my kind of entire thesis about this draft is that because you have first round grades on like 8 to 9 edge rushers, perhaps, or like at minimum, like maybe 5, that you can kind of just go with the consensus here, because like, how do I, as an analyst, say that Abdul Carter or Jalen Walker is going to be better than Mike Green or Princely U or some of these other guys? Like, it's very difficult to say that with any degree of confidence, right? And so, like, if I'm in the edge market, I'm looking for guys who have fallen deeply since the season ended, James Pierce. But obviously there's reasons why. Like, I would suspect the Bengals at 17 just like end up lucking into James Pierce. That would make sense. Everything they've done, drafting Jermaine Burton, like other items where like they typically draft big school guys and they draft guys that fall to them, which ironically is like kind of the analytical way to do it. Is that. So I actually think this is a fine spot to just draft Mike Green, frankly.
Yeah. No, I
immensely
agree.
Productive. Like, the question is like how much does 20 sacks or whatever, however many sacks he had actually mean against, Sunbelt competition? But given he's like at consensus right here, I think you just take him.
Yeah. And, there was that concern that him being a small school guy, completely dominating competition. But to me, one, he was so dominant that it almost didn't matter. And two,
he's a good guy to bring up the rookie draft guide.
Oh, yeah. Let's do that. Yeah. I think that would be great.
Because like you're going to see a crazy amount of blue for Mike Green.
Immensely productive. All right, let me pull that up here. But yeah, and just to add a little bit to the whole Mike Green thing, he was also someone who was amazing in his limited time at the Senior Bowl. And it's like if you can dominate against NFL competition.
Okay, sitting in the bleachers there, and this is not just me saying this. This is Sean Syed saying this as well. Okay. It's like he made big plays at the Senior Bowl. He kind of would get eaten up by like the bigger guys and the more talented. Like I loved Ariante Ursary because Ariante Ursary was like just swallowing him whole. But at the same time, like you're winning against a guy like Josh Connerly, who a lot of people think is really good. And you see this in the pass rush. I mean, it's just like blue. Like the dude was productive. And so, I think this is a fine pick. And I think this is going to be great for the Falcons, given you're not doing too much. You're not going too crazy outside of the consensus. You just get a guy at a position of need at the right time.
Yeah. And it's like, I think the concerns a little bit were the whole small school thing, and you're not going to win every rep. And so when you're going up against these massive guys, he is 6'3", which is not massive for an edge rusher. Typically, guys get up to the 6'4", 6'5" range. But yeah, I just think it's difficult to argue with how productive he was. And then he seems like a fine athlete as well. And, you need athletes at the edge rusher spot. But yeah, I think he would be great here just because he was so productive. And yeah, I think he would be perfect.
Yep.
All right, let's transition back to the mock draft simulator here. And then at 46, there still is Savon Ravel. There's Trey Amos. We don't really need any skill position guys. If you want to double dip at edge, we can do that as well. There's a lot of guys here.
Yeah, we kind of have our pick of the litter here. dang, Cam Scatterbo is like very high.
Yeah.
Man, there's a lot of different ways you could go here. What I really wanted to do was go interior defensive line, but there's not like a quality guy that I'm really liking.
I think there's Omar Norman Lott, which if you want to trade down and select him later, we can do that because there is a really big gap between us at 46 and then 118, which is our next pick. So I think that could be a strat that we could do.
And I like CJ West too.
Yeah. A great run stuffer. I don't know if you've seen an interview he did with Brett Coleman and EJ, but yeah, really fascinating guy.
What's the offensive line guys looking like?
Let's see what we got. And then mostly that'll show you guards and tackles. Ursere is still there, the guy that did dominate Mike Green. So I don't know if there'll be locker room tension because of that, but I think he's pretty good as well.
Him at an ADP of 59.7, like it's just not in alignment with my understanding of the market. And again, like this is PFF's board. Yeah, like I mean, he's like 45 on. I guess that's not far off.
Who wants?
What about interior guys?
Interior offensive line.
Yeah.
There's Wilson, who's like probably the best pure center. At that, there's not a lot of guys at this
spot.
At least.
Is low. This is interesting. This is interesting to me just about the breaks of the draft. Yeah, we haven't traded back yet. I'd be fine with you trading back. I'll let you be my draft day.
All right, let's do it.
My draft day trader.
All right, so Bucks, we'd be dropping back just a few spots, and then.
I mean, I'd probably want to be in like the 60s here, ideally, like maybe late 50s.
All right, Bills have 56 and 62.
Yeah,
right,
let's.
I don't think that we want to get that, but
62 is of interest to me.
It is, yeah. I don't know if we can make it work because we only have 118, unless we want to just drop back straight to 62, and then we give up.
Couldn't we pick swap here a little bit
to get 56 and 62?
No, just 62.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So we'd be dropping back a few spots. We get 109. And then, I don't know, I'm cool with giving up a 7th. Just because with the PFF mock draft simulator, you can kind of abuse it a little bit. And just to show real quick, you could get almost all of these picks, even though that probably would not happen.
So what is 62 is a fourth or a third?
62 is, I think it's a late second.
Late second. So we're basically dropping back. So yeah, this makes like perfect pick swap. So like it would make sense to be like we drop back, we get like a 4th or a 5th, and they get like a 7th. Yeah, basically what you were setting up, I think.
Yeah. I think that would be perfect. All right, and then so we'd be dropping back to 62. And then let's see who's still available. Is Omar Norman Lott? Let's see.
Dang, they took all our guys.
They did. Yeah, Ursere went 2 picks before. That's a very Lionsy pick because he's just so good, and you don't need him right away, but he's going to be so good when he actually plays.
Yeah.
There we go. Stewart. CJ West is still there. I don't know. A lot of our guys did get taken, but to me, there's Norman Lott, there's Josiah Stewart, there's CJ West, there's Alfred Collins. There's still a lot of guys we could go here.
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of reaching here on those guys. We're like 10 picks over ADP. Scroll up. Who are we like not? Well, let's see.
It's mainly offense. I mean, there is Demetrius Knight. I don't know how you feel about him, but we don't really need a cornerback as much anymore.
Alfred Collins is an interesting one too.
Yeah,
because like I think they're a lot lower on Alfred Collins than like most people are. Like he's a pursuit guy for us in terms of badges. Like he has an okay pressure rate. He has a pretty good pressure rate against quality teams. I'm just like trying to like he's the one who's like kind of catching my eye of a guy who feels like a guy who's played many years has been quite productive. You know, he's a little bit more of a run stuffer. He was probably more productive last year than he was this year. Yeah, let's go with Alfred Collins. Yeah, let's reach a little bit.
Let's do it. All right, and then we have 109 thanks to the trade that we made, and then 118, 132, 218. All right. So lot of defense still available with Bossa, with Femi, like you mentioned before.
So
Jonas
I
Sanker's
actually
still
think
there.
I think there is an argument that they could probably go wide receiver here.
Yeah.
So like I know we have Kyle. We've never
We'll
picked
avoid
Kyle
him.
Williams.
Yeah.
No, let's pick. Have we picked him before? I can't even remember.
We picked Kyle the first draft.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So, like I think the Falcons are going to be in an interesting situation to trade back a lot. I still just want to address like the interior, like the swing lineman roles here.
Because plus Torrey Horton, I think we can get him with one of our future picks as well. And I know you do like him.
The guy here is Tez. Like Tez fits in so well with that team. Just like Darnell is a true Z, and you can move Pitts and you can move Drake London around. And so to add a true S, I think we're going to be able to get him at our next pick or maybe our next 2 picks. But let's look at all the positions here.
Yeah. Let's see about not that. So there's tackle that we still have. We can move one of those guys inside. How do you feel about Willie Lampkin? I know he's probably going to have to play center because he's so tiny.
Let's do it because he's a guy who's just Thomas talks about these like maulers or these like meatheads. And like that's the kind of that's the approach that he has. He's just like if you don't like the size, it's gonna cause problems, but like immensely productive. You're talking about like just missed the top 25 in terms of pass blocking, one of the best run blockers. Let's we're reaching a little bit here, but we're getting more into the hundreds. So
there's a saying that Luke Braun from Locked On Vikings says that I like a lot, which is don't necessarily worry about guys who have built-in solutions to their problems. And Willie Lampkin to me is a perfect example of that. That his problem, quote unquote, is that he's 5'11", he's 290, so he's tiny for a guard/center. But like you mentioned, he's such a mauler. He's so mean, and he's great at moving in space. And he's all of these things that you worry about for these bigger guys that he's actually solved. I think that would be like, I think it's perfect for them. But it's also so interesting because not every guy is going to fit your physical profile like a Tez Johnson, like a Willie Lampkin, but they're so productive. It's just sometimes hard to argue with that.
Yeah.
All right. And then 118, 132, 218. Do you want to go Tez here? Or maybe.
Let's go Tez here.
All right, cool.
This is a guy who demolishes all of our Sumer scores. And again, very small, but it's just like quite productive and did so by jumping from like Troy to Oregon and played against some of the best teams last year and like just lit it, like had a great season.
Yeah, 100%. Kyle Williams is still there. I don't think we'll go him, but it is interesting. Billy Bowman, if you want to draft a successor to Jesse Bates, we can do that. Brashard Smith, there's Barrett Carter.
I actually do like Brashard Smith here because in the same vein as Tez Johnson, like you always want to have like tailback depth is not a given, especially because any of those guys can drop at any time. And I think once we're starting to get in the hundreds, a guy like Brashard Smith, who has that swing ability, especially in Zach Robinson's offense, is really, really interesting to me.
No, I agree here. All right. And then 218 is
we're going to get a bad grade for the Falcons, but it's going to be okay.
Yeah. Cause it's like you mentioned, PFF has their own thing, but we're picking guys that we need more. I think this is almost the opposite of what we've done with the Saints in the sense that we're not necessarily just picking guys based on, consensus big board standings. But I think we're getting guys we like a lot. And I think that's also fun for mock draft stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Next up, 218 is the final pick. Don't think
Jay
we can get back
Higgins,
a quarterback. Jay Higgins.
What quarterbacks are left? Because like here's where we start getting in the zone where it's like, can I get him as an undrafted free agent? Yeah, Brosmer's really the only one that interests me here.
Yeah.
But yeah, Jay Higgins is the one that I really like because they played an interesting way. And they did so last year too, where they have Ellis at the linebacker position, who is like kind of covering, but also playing a little bit of like Sam, blitzes a lot. I think Jay Higgins is like a true coverage linebacker.
Mhm.
And I think if you're talking about a guy who in that kind of defensive style could fit in really well,
Mhm.
Jay Higgins is that guy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
just like an
91
old,
coverage grade.
he's like weird because he's like an old school linebacker, like Iowa guy, but
Mhm.
he's also like kind of new school in the way he plays.
Mhm.
And so I like Jay Higgins here.
Cool. All right, and then that was the last pick that the Falcons have made. And so, yeah, like you mentioned, I don't think our grade will be super high. I do think Mike Green will get us a good grade because we address an immediate need and then we reach or we draft, right around consensus. But I don't know, I'd give us like I give us like a B or a B plus.
Yeah, I mean they're just way lower on Lampkin, or they're particularly way lower on Alfred Collins in the consensus. Like I think he's like 60 on mock draft database consensus big board.
Mhm.
I have him like 15 picks behind that. Like that's just like gonna drill us.
No, agreed. Yeah, but it's like you're addressing immediate needs here. I think you pull off a good trade that increases your depth a lot. You're getting
Yeah.
Tez Johnson, who, like you mentioned, his testing was a little bit weird because his 40 time wasn't super high, but I don't particularly care. When on the field, he's amazing. And
Right.
yeah, I know, like, what was Sumer's speed grade if you have that pulled up for Tez Johnson? Because I'm sure it was quick, wasn't it?
Yeah. Let me get that pulled up. While we're doing that, what's our score? This is like just so. What's our score for the draft?
Oh, they gave us a B plus. I would personally give us something along those lines, but for different reasons. Like I think Alfred Collins was perfectly fine. I think Lampkin perfectly fine. I think maybe Brashard Smith will ding us a tiny bit just because it's not as immediate of a need. But I think you bring up a great point that you're going to need depth at the running back spot because it's not going to be guaranteed. Because as good as Bijan Robinson is, as good as Tyler, good as he is, it's like you just don't know for sure if these guys are going to stay healthy for an entire season, given what happened, with teams.
Yeah, and to come back to Tez, we had Tez as really fast, like a 95th percentile and up player. Like I just think he has a different type of game speed than he does otherwise. All right, let's buzz through our Bucks.
Yes, yep. Bucks are going to be way easier because their needs are not as immediate. Their team is probably a lot better. So let's cover them real quick.
Yeah.
Tampa. All right. So, their big splash was Hassan Reddick, 1 year, $14 million. I think that's a fine deal. You're buying a dip on a guy who was super productive the previous season, not necessarily this season, but was very, very good the season before that. And so I think great pick for them there. Aside from that, you're getting Chris Godwin, which was like your big splash. You're keeping Levante David for another year, which they do almost every single year. But yeah, I think Bucks are great. They're probably going to win the division. Do you have any takes on the Bucks free agency?
Yeah, I think they really struggled at the edge position down the stretch. Like they had to bring Shaq Barrett out of retirement, basically, which is not ideal for the playoffs. Which again, not ideal. I think Hassan Reddick's a stopgap solution, and maybe he has a good year and ends up being a key player for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So let's transition to their depth chart. And obviously, they are completely stacked at receiver. Godwin, amazing. Jalen McMillan, great last season. Mike Evans, first ballot Hall of Famer. Their offensive line, like you mentioned, with their tackles is great. Their guard center are pretty solid. They're definitely not a bad offensive line. And then Baker Mayfield, their quarterback of maybe the long-term future, definitely the next 2-3 years. And then Cade Otton is a really underrated tight end. They obviously hit on Bucky Irving being like their great pick last season. Do you have any immediate needs to address for the Bucks offense?
Not really.
Yeah.
Like this is one of the tighter offenses in the league this year, in my opinion. I think you could probably not really.
Yeah, you have to like squint and then maybe go guard or something like that. But still,
yeah, maybe like tight end, like just add a premium talent tight end. But I mean, for the most part, this is a tight team.
Yeah, and it's almost like, we talk about weak link for defense. This is like a weak link offense in a sense that there's almost no immediate issue that they have, and yet they still have like crazy strength at the receiver spot. Baker Mayfield is like arguably top 10, top 15 quarterback, and so I think they're great. Defense, like you mentioned, edge rusher is going to be their most immediate need. They did get Kalijah Cansey a few years ago to be like the defensive penetrating 3 tech, and he's been fine so far. Vita Vea, obviously one of the best nose tackles of the past 5 years. But yeah, edge rusher, I think, is probably the most immediate need here.
Yeah, corner, I think, as well, to a certain degree. They had varying degrees of production from Zion McCollum and Jamel Dean last year, but the thing that failed them for most of the year was the defense. So I think they're in a position to kind of take the best defensive player available at any position and keep it trucking.
Yeah, and I think that's probably going to be the strat that we'll follow as well, because there's going to be some really good edge rusher that falls to 19, as there has been in almost every draft we've had so far. And so it's really just take the guy that you like best at that spot. So
yeah, the guys who I've circled is like the edge rushers, Jahdae Barron, maybe Jahad Campbell as well. I think those are all of interest.
Agreed. All right, so let's see which one of those guys is here. Malachi Starks is there. Donovan Izaraku is there. And then I think, James Pierce is still there. So let me ask you, do you have Izaraku or Pierce higher, at least in your personal big board, if you were to have one?
I mean, it's tough. Again, I take it, I don't even claim to be a scout at any given point in time, which I know a lot of analysts do. If you had to tell me to analyze it, character concerns aside, whatever those may be, if you're telling me that James Pierce was going to be a top pick in August, had a pretty good season, and now all of a sudden he's going to be a 2nd round pick, that rings alarm bells.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming, we missed out on Jahad Campbell. That was the one that I was really looking at. What's the corner situation look like? I'm assuming Barron went as well.
I think he did. Savon Ravel and Amos are both there, and there's an off chance we can get one of those guys at the 53 spot. It's unlikely, but it is possible. Honestly, I'll leave it up to you between Izaraku or Pierce if it is between those two. But I don't really think you can go wrong. Izaraku may be a little more technically refined, and there's not the whole character concerns as well. But James Pierce, like you mentioned, he was projected to be a top 5 pick last year, and had a great season. And all of a sudden, he's going late first, early second.
Yeah, because we're not actually having to think about team chemistry, and even if you are having to think about that, this is a pretty veteran team as well, with Levante David, with Mike Evans, guys who have been in that position before, and a pretty veteran coach as well. So I think if there is a good landing spot for James Pierce, it's probably going to be Tampa.
Yeah, let's do it. He's a great speed rusher, ran a great 40 time, and he's long. He's a little bit skinny for an edge rusher, but to me, whenever you're that productive, I'm not too worried about that.
Yeah, and also you have Vita Vea, who's a 3 gap player.
So. Exactly. It's they equal the weight of an average defensive lineman.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. 53. There is Benjamin Morrison. I don't know if there's too much of a concern with him here, but let's see what corners.
I like Ben Morrison here. I think that makes a lot of sense for them.
I do. Yeah. Because it's based on his tape, and I'm definitely not a scout as well, but the people I respect have his tape graded as close to a 1st round grade. And whenever you're getting that in the late 2nd round, to me, I think that's good value.
So, and like I said, this is a team that has stars. You have Vita Vea, who's one of the best players at the position. You have Baker and all the offensive guys. What we've done in round 1 and 2 is add 2 players that most people think can be certified blue chip guys. Not even, but they have character concerns. They have injury concerns, and so I think a team that really wants to compete, really wants to take it to the next level, that risk profile is tasteful to them.
Agreed. All right. And then at 84, most of the guys who
I'm shocked there's not a tight end here.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there Kevin Winston still there? But I mean, we're already solid on safety.
Yeah. You have guys like Winfield. Winfield's been hurt a lot though.
That is true. Yeah. It's really just picking luxury guys. Harold Fannon's here. I don't know if you want to pick him.
That would be something. Because if he works out and they have just 5 guys that are all over the place, there feels like there should be an interior offensive lineman here as well.
Yeah, and most of these guys are tackle / guard guys.
Yeah,
Jared
Seven
Wilson's
Eyes
still
here.
There. Yeah, 7 Eyes there. Milam, Ratledge.
So they went Graham Barton last year. What pick is this? 84.
This is 84. Yeah.
Ratledge feels like a guy that makes sense for them. And right at this point, we're just going like diversity picks because we did 7-9 and did Millham already. Tate Ratledge was a guy that Lindsay highlighted as when she was asking folks at the Combine. Lindsay Rhodes, my co-host for the Sumer Sports Show, highlighted as a guy who everyone was like, this could be like the guy who plays the most years in the league. Like that's just the type of player he is. 6'7", 308. Excellent in terms of pressures allowed. I think we go Tate here. I think we reach a little bit and but has the Georgia pedigree, and is a guy who has an interesting profile.
Yeah. And like we mentioned, it's mainly just luxury picks here because you don't have the most immediate needs. And, Ratledge could just play whatever guard you think is weaker, down the line. And I think that's perfect for them.
Yep.
All right. Finally, actually, we have 3 more picks left. We're at 121. There's a lot of receivers that have fallen, but they do not need receivers. That's like the one spot where they feel perfectly comfortable there. Billy Bowman's still there. I know
I'm going to go off the beaten path here.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Let's take a glance at Will Howard.
Okay.
So they re-signed Trask.
Yep.
But what is this? Is this like the 4th, 5th round?
Yeah, this is 4th round. Yep.
So let's play out a nightmare scenario for them at quarterback. Baker gets hurt or Baker starts turning the ball over again. I don't think this is going to happen. I'm really just taking a stand here on Will Howard is an interesting prospect. Pull up his draft profile.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, Will
this
Howard.
This is strangely one of the most accurate and athletic guys in the draft. Which
that's what's
really
weird.
Weird.
Is that it's typically going to be either super athletes or it's going to be guys who are accurate, but he's almost both. And despite that, he still is not going as high. Okay, let me control that.
Well, and the reason, I don't know if you watched the whole Gruden thing. The reason, his explanation is the reason why I think he's dropped, which is that go is green. I'm going to throw it to Emeka Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith every single play, way down the field, and they're going to make plays. Congratulations, dude. So what I'm pulling up here, I'm looking at some of our internal metrics. What I'm trying to get a sense of is his accuracy while he was at K-State in it. And he was still quite accurate in 23, above top 25, really top 10, both in 23 and 24. But you're looking at some of these profiles, a pretty good pressure to sack ratio. When pressure comes, he's going to stick there in the pocket. Excellent for Mike Evans. Scroll up to his drop back portfolio.
Yeah.
You're not going to get a lot of scrambles for him, but he can be a designed run guy, which I think is interesting. Scroll down. Excellently productive, and then completion percentage over expected, as we said, difficult to parse out. A lot of these are small sample too, the 58.7 is very small sample. It's difficult to parse out what's Egbuka and Smith and what's him. But is it when you have Chris Godwin, Jalen McMillan, and Mike Evans?
No,
is this a guy who can just be a quarterback 3 next year? Baker is what, 30? Kyle Trask is a backup, probably. And Kyle Trask isn't really an athlete at that level. Let's just, let's take a swing. Let's step up to the plate and take a swing with Will Howard.
Yeah. And I think not only is it fun, but I think you make a great case because typically when you're drafting a quarterback past the 2nd round, you're pretty much setting that pick on fire. But it's like you mentioned, when you're throwing to Jeremiah Smith and Egbuka, all these really talented guys, it's not that much of a drop off from throwing to all the guys that Tampa has. And I think we almost had a similar conversation with Penix a few years ago or last year where it's everyone talked about Penix has these amazing receivers, and he did, but Atlanta also has good receivers that he can throw it to. And so I think with Howard, he's not as good as Penix, but I think you make the case here that it's a good long-term move, and I think it's fun.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right, and then finally, there's 2 picks left. 157, 235. Kyle Williams is still falling. That is very surprising. There may be a few tight ends here. Gadsden, I feel like we can pick with our last pick because I do like him a lot.
Yeah, he's a good player.
Yeah.
So we're at 157.
Yes.
A lot of tight ends, a lot of running backs. This is it's just interesting on how it falls.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And if you want to go linebacker, we haven't done that yet as well. And Levante David is great, but he's also not super young. He's been around a
I
while.
saw Kobe King pop up. He's interesting to me.
He is, yeah.
Let me pull up his metrics.
Yeah, and he was great against the run, 89 run grade. And I think like when it comes to PFF grading, run grade to me is a little more accurate than pass grade, because whenever coverage is perfect, the quarterback tends to check it down, and that means you're throwing towards a linebacker. So it's like the best case scenario for a defensive or for a pass outcome whenever the quarterback actually throws the ball is towards a guy that a linebacker is covering. And so while coverage grade is going to be important, I don't put as much stock in a coverage grade as I do a run grade.
Right. And also, like, these are run first players. We actually have him as like a pretty good coverage guy as well.
Okay.
I like Kobe King here. I think that's an interesting selection.
Yeah. All right. And then 235, I hope one of these good tight ends falls, because yeah, it's like you don't need it, but it's a luxury pick, and that's pretty much.
And
what
honestly, like, I'd be willing to go with like a more run blocky tight end too, especially given like the way they like to play now that they're like a running offense.
Mm-hmm.
I think we got screwed. Yeah.
We did.
Brutal.
Yeah, Leahy went 2 picks before us.
Yeah, that was the one. He's like, to speak the scout language, because I watched him at the Senior Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
He's like a little stiffer. He routed up Shiloh Sanders on a stick nod at one point, but he's definitely a guy who is interesting.
There's a lot of receivers, a lot of running backs.
Good old Graham Mertz. Yeah, I mean, like at this point, it becomes kind of a toss up. Is like LaQuint Allen available?
Is he? Oh, I don't think so. I feel like he would be a little higher, because I do like LaQuint Allen.
Yeah.
He's not. Yeah, if you want, we haven't gone running back yet. So if you want to pick like a third guy, or maybe even a fourth guy, like, I don't have super strong opinions on any of these guys, but it's.
Yeah, I think we just take the best available at whatever
and
position.
Let's do that. Raheem Sanders. Don't know too much about you, but he's going to be.
So he's a pretty good player. He comes from a South Carolina team that's like kind of, I don't want to say overperformed.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of like, he goes by Rocket. He's like kind of a durability concern. He's pretty effective. I think it's a fine pick. He's missed a lot of games in the last 2 years. Pretty productive though. Yeah, like all things considered.
Agreed. All right, so let's cover what's happened in the draft so far. Not a ton of picks, but you're getting Pierce, you're getting Morrison, you're getting Ratledge. Most of these guys are luxury picks, but you're getting much better at the edge rusher spot, which was the most immediate need. And then you're getting much better at cornerback. You get your potential quarterback of the future, and then Ratledge, I think, could slot in at any of those guard spots in the near future. But I think this was, to me, probably as well a B+, A- sort of draft for the Bucs. Do you have any thoughts on the Bucs draft?
I think altogether, like, I think this has the opportunity to be pretty productive for all 4 of these teams.
Mm-hmm.
Given that they're all in a situation where they can address needs, but also take really good players.
Yeah. No, I agree. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Sam. This was a mammoth of an episode, but I had a great time. We got deep into music and into football. Where can the listeners find your work?
Yeah, so go check out the draft guide, sumersports.com. It's excellent. I mean, like, we tried to take this approach of something that we would deliver to a team. And so, like, it has all the, what we call the scouting colors, like it really shows you what actually the grades mean, rather than just throwing a number on there. Mm-hmm. We have, our write-ups from Sean Syed that are just a quick blurb that, elevator pitch for the guy. And I think it's comprehensive and complimentary of some of the great work that other people do. And it's just great data, and it's so useful. So go check that out. And then Sumer Sports Show, Draft FM podcast, wherever you can find those 2 podcasts.
Well, this is Analytics with Asa, and thank you for listening.